thank everybody for coming out. One of the things that concerned me when I had first started talking to people in Clarksburg was that out of all the areas in the districts that or all of the places that I represent, it seemed to me as though the one that continuously had failed delivery, failed promises, and pretty much nothing delivered to them that they said was going to be delivered to them was Clarksburg. And I took issue with that. And I heard it on the campaign trail when I knocked on many of your doors and when I stood outside of polling places and had conversations with you. And I told many of you that I talked to that I was going to make Clarksburg my #1 priority. And that's why I'm here tonight. Clarksburg is, and I've said this in the media, and I've said it to many of you, Clarksburg is my #1 priority. And I promise you, we are going to get things moving in Clarksburg. That is my goal. And I can tell you right now that it's going to be accomplished only through you. And that's the reason why I wanted to have this meeting this evening, because it's important for me that before we move forward to understand what we're moving towards. Now, many of you have heard that we have a work group that's working on identifying some of the priorities when it comes to Clarksburg and what's most important to its residents. And I appreciate that working group, and certainly we don't want to circumvent what's happening there. But I feel as though it's always important for my residents to have a voice. And so that's why I wanted to have this program this evening, so that those of you that aren't on the working group can also contribute and tell me what's most important to you. And so I would, at this point, because, you know, I talked a lot on the campaign trail. I did a lot of talking, and you guys did a lot of listening. This isn't the time for that. This is the time for me to listen. And I want to hear from you. So at this point, I'd like to open it up. And it's along those same themes of what matters to you most. What are the things that you need to have here in Clarksburg? This is one of those issues that unfortunately came about because, and let's just say this, as a result of what has happened, our processes have changed. And I think that that's important because we learned a valuable lesson that came out of realizing that no one was really doing the checking. No one was really going and doing the inspecting to make sure that the heights were the proper height and that they weren't, 5 inches over or 13 inches over the maximum height. That just wasn't a part of the process. And now we realize that that's important. Unfortunately, I think, due to the fact that, it's not as if people didn't know. And by people, I mean the people that were building your property didn't know what the proper regulations were. And without getting into the blame game, I think that it's important for us in moving forward to know that now we've learned from that. And I know that in my conversations with Park and Planning that they now make sure that that's a standard part of their process. So while it doesn't help you from that sense, it can in the future planning, but it can in the future planning as we look at designing the areas around and incorporating that to make sure that we take into account that some of the residents have lost parking, and are there ways in which we can future develop and look at areas around there for parking for visitors and for residents that have lost their parking also. So very good point. On the campaign trail when I was standing outside of Clarksburg High School, I had a family that came up to me and told me, that they weren't going to vote for me. And I said, I didn't understand why. And they said, because you haven't delivered when it came to hearing our needs for water in the historic district. And, quite frankly, we hadn't heard as much of it on the state level. Now that I've been briefed, it's very, very different in terms of the understanding about some of the challenges that we face with water access. And I think that when we look at the number of properties that are in stage 3 and moving to stage 4, that's our biggest linchpin in making sure that connectivity is there.
What's stage 3 and stage 4?
I apologize. Thank you, sir. Oftentimes, and thank you for that, we get too caught up in these terminologies. Essentially, there are properties right now that are owned by developers that are in certain stages in terms of water quality approval. And currently right now, there are a number of properties that are adjacent to the historic district that are in what's called stage 3. They've met certain requirements that allow them to move through the process in terms of making sure that the environmental mitigations are what they need to be, that water quality standards are met, they meet the master planning standards, and or the plans that are set within the master plan in terms of just being in accordance. And currently, some of those properties that are adjacent to the historic district are in stage 3. And stage 4 would be the final stage before they could start proposing plans to develop. And so what we're looking at now is if some of those areas might be able to bridge the access for getting water to the historic district, which is a priority. And one of those plans includes the Clarksburg Fire Department and that fire station that's there, because that does have approval, and that we're looking at being a linchpin to be able to bridge and bring water across. But that is definitely a top priority for us. And I think that there are a number of different other processes we might be able to utilize to get that. We've worked with WSSC, and the county executive has also written a letter to WSSC inquiring about why there's been this stagnation with moving forward in terms of allowing for access. So there are a number of different modes that are working together in tandem, but that can also be separated. But I anticipate that we should have something in place very soon as a vehicle to be able to ensure that we're bringing water to the historic district. Of course, leave it to Barry to ask the tough question. Thank you for that, Barry. No, you know, I've been very vocal in terms of my support of Adventist Project and the Clarksburg Hospital. I wrote a letter in support of that and stood by my decision in all of the interviews that have been forthcoming. The challenge now, and I think that this is something for folks to remember, is that the commission was set up to make these kinds of decisions. And the folks that were appointed to it were trusted to be able to take all of the information and make what they thought was the best decision for us moving forward. And while it might not be what I agree with, I think that it's important for us to respect, and us being, especially the elected officials, to respect the decision of the commission while we don't agree with it. And at this point, to go and circumvent to say, well, I would only accept or agree with you if you agreed with me, I don't think is necessarily the right thing for us to do. So I can't speak to what the former council did before, but I can tell you that I do agree with you in the sense that Clarksburg does need an anchor. And I think that that's extremely important, and that's why I've been in conversations with Mike Smith and Bill Hard over at Elcor, the ComSat property, because I think that that's a great opportunity for us in looking at bringing in some sort of maybe a federal installation, and I will continue to work to that end. The interesting thing is that, you know, an up-county hospital was a part of the master plan, and that's something that a lot of people didn't talk about, but it is a part of our master plan in Clarksburg to have an up-county hospital. And so that, I think, you know, while I represent Germantown and live in Germantown, I think that the Shady Grove Adventist site there did a phenomenal job in terms of the emergency center. So I thought that my residents in Germantown were well served. And even those that are on the fringe of Clarksburg that still utilize that facility as well. But, you know, it's one of those where we have to move forward. I think that the commission has made their decision, and we have to find something else. And I will be extremely vigilant in working with the local chambers as well as my connections, both locally as well as on Capitol Hill, to try and make sure that we're finding someone, because I think that that's an important part as we move forward here in Clarksburg. So thank you. The question is, in terms of 27 and transportation infrastructure, and also in terms of us moving forward and making sure that it's not just asking questions and having town halls, but actually doing something. Well, I will tell you that even before taking the oath of office, the week before, in fact, I had met with the county executive in terms of the Clarksburg Development District, and at that time, the county executive was actually considering and contemplating vetoing and not signing the resolution in dissolving the Clarksburg Development District. And I told the county executive that I thought that that was a huge mistake, and for us to move forward, we needed to get rid of the development district and start over. And then the county executive backed off his position and actually wrote a letter thanking me for my weighing in on the issue, and decided that he would not veto that legislation. That was step one, in just making sure that people knew that I was making Clarksburg our priority. Step two was making sure that we had this town hall, even though we have a working group, to make sure that I was out there finding out what the ideas are from you, the residents, and making sure we prioritize. Step three is taking all of this information and data and compiling it in terms of what's most important to you, and going through that process and working through it in order. You will see action from my office before the end of the summer. I guarantee you that. I've told you many times that Clarksburg is my #1 priority, and I assure you that we are going to start moving. And it's not going to be everything at once, but it's a process, and it's going to be step by step, and we're going to take different steps to make sure that we're getting there. And depending on what the needs are that you identify, that will shape which direction we go in and which steps come first. But I assure you that we are definitely going to make sure that the Clarksburg plan is moving forward, and we are delivering on the infrastructure that you've been promised.